So, there are a lot, and I mean a lot of things that most people don't understand about most of the DR cast, right down to the basis that I always talk about with DR, which is meta commentary and genre reconstruction. There is nothing more like face palm inducing than hearing someone reach the end of V3 or so and say, oh, this is getting meta. Or hear someone say, oh, I don't like that character because they're just like a copy and paste of a previous character. When copying tropes and concepts and reusing and recycling tropes is literally the fundamental point of the series. Or hearing someone say like, oh, I didn't like that part. That was like an animated stereotype. That was just like an anime trailer. Or, oh, Monokuma does, like the occasional fourth wall break here and there. Like he's done fourth wall breaks before. And the entire motherfucking game is the very on-the-nose metaphor for genre conventions, and literally everything is a fourth wall break? Because people are not attuned to thinking of media in a metaphorical sense. This results in a lot of, pointless and annoying diversions. Only in the last 2 years have I been made aware of the debate surrounding, say, whether or not Fujisaki is an appropriate representation of trans people because he cross-dresses like a girl. But they're viewing this series as being, completely literal. Everything has to be plot diegetic, and everything has to be a representation of real life, instead of seeing that Fujisaki being trans or a crossdresser or anything is the furthest thing from the game's mind, because the point is recycling the trope of the trap character, quote-unquote. A common trope in Japanese media for an androgynous character to be revealed to be the opposite gender they're assumed to be by others, usually as a gag. This is also partly because cross-dressing is just more prominent in Japanese culture than in Western culture, and it doesn't necessarily reflect, gender identity or someone being trans or non-binary or anything. It can just be cross-dressing. That is a thing in Japan. But all of that is meaningless and irrelevant because Fujisaki is not a representation of anything that's supposed to be a real person. He's a representation of the very trope of a trap character. That's the idea. He is a subversion of the trap gag that takes the same concept and follows it to its rational conclusion. Reconstruction seeks to take a trope that is overused or considered shallow or something like that, and following the established rules of that trope, not changing anything about it while changing the context and presentation to make it more interesting and more fresh. Instead of being a gag character, Fujisaki has his entire backstory and personality and role in the story and role in the themes of his chapter based around him being a trap. It seeks to create an explanation for why he would be a trap character in the first place and turns that trope into the most important aspect of his character. It turns a dramatic element that can be contrasted with Mondo's own tropes that he's meant to embody and subvert. Everything about Fujisaki was built from asking the question, well, what if we made a trap character but twisted around the context? That is what DR is, an examination of the tropes and stereotypes and cliches that it chooses to parody and evolve off of, which is why the series has so much repetition in it. Anyways, since you can look at every character or plot point as an element of a self-contained narrative, and as a metaphor that forces you to examine the tropes you've come to blindly accept in media, and twist your way of thinking about these tropes and what is possible to do with them in a story, there ends up being a ton of great, clever little ideas in these characters that end up going overlooked, especially in the West, where people are not as familiar with Japanese tropes as they would be of Western tropes. People get all of the parody aspects in, something like Rick and Morty here, because we understand what they're referencing and what they're making fun of. That's true for all characters in this series, but Akane Owari is one of the ones that gets the most misaligned, even from the people that actually like her. Now, nothing I just said is meant to imply that these games are, just so deep, bro, you don't even know, man, they're fucking perfect. You're blind, you don't see how they fit together, bro. The games are still prone to a lot of changing ideas, and a lot of, chopping and hacking things together in awkward ways, and the level of cleverness of any given idea fluctuates a lot. DR2 especially went through a lot of changes to the story, late changes in the game's development, and this kind of leaves a lot of people with the impression that it doesn't come together in a way that makes all of the elements work nicely. Like, a lot of people think Sonya is a pointless character, for example, or there are issues with Chapter 3 that people have with it, or... Like, although in that case, I do find it odd, like, since there are plenty of characters that are mostly irrelevant to the stories of these games, like Ibuki, for example. It's like a character has to either be a killer, a victim, or have a very prominent sub-arc, like Himiko or Fuyuhiko, even if they still really aren't more relevant to the main story after their little moment in the sun, little spotlight moment. Like, Fuyuhiko doesn't really do much after Chapter 3, or, you know, they have to be one of the main characters like Kirigiri, but whatever, that's neither here nor there. I basically wanted to say that characters are probably more interesting than you give them credit for if you aren't really studying them, and especially if you're logically dismissing them because they aren't relevant, quote-unquote, and because you're not looking at them as fourth wall breaks and trope deconstruction and studying their influences and ideas. And this is certainly the case for Miss Akane. So to start with, the thing that I think that everyone who defends Akane starts with in most of these kind of videos, the most obvious stuff you can observe about her character through the hard evidence in the main story and the free time events, the FTEs. Let's see. Akane is introduced as being a troublemaker. She's carefree. She doesn't remember anyone's name. She immediately is given similar traits to Asahina from DR1. They have obvious visual similarities, similar ultimate talents. They both can't spell people's names. They're both dumbasses. And then later on, they have even more obvious traits, like they're both, like, in Chapter 4, they both lose someone they care about and are driven to seek revenge on whoever the culprit is, or whoever they perceive to, be blameworthy or anything for the instance, whatever. Anyways, however, Akane's cheerfulness doesn't come across the same as the Genki archetype character of Hina. Hina is very friendly and very personable. She connects with people easily. But Akane just has fun and enjoys things in her own little world, and usually doesn't pay much attention to the others around her. She doesn't connect with people when she talks to them. Akane dresses in a provocative way that clearly isn't a deliberate attempt to be sexual. She's even more casual than Hina, to the point where she could be considered shameless or at least ignorant of how she's perceived. When she's introduced, we're told that she does gymnastics for money. She gets bored easily, and she's not a very nice person, like she's not rude or like antagonistic, but like I said, she doesn't really connect with people, so she isn't very attentive to other people's feelings or anything, and she really doesn't care that much in conversations. Her attitudes in conversations are very self-centered. She expresses when she feels bored or angry or cheerful, makes no attempt to align those feelings with the others around her. She's often pretty rude, but not in like a malicious way. She really just is only thinking about herself most of the time. We're told that she performs well if she's feeling good, but she'll often go off book and ignore the choreography of her routine while performing and end up messing up a show. Hajime describes her as self-centered. We know that she's extremely hedonistic. She loves to eat, she likes to be active, she likes to fight strong people and win, she loves moving her body, she likes massages. She's a pure hedonist, and I'll come back to that in a bit. Oh yeah, and she hates working hard. Like, she hates training and doing anything that bores her, and in her bio it literally says in her dislikes that she hates working hard. This will also be an important point we'll come back to. In a quick overview, she likes fighting strong people. She fights Nekomaru a lot and gets her ass fucking beat. Personally, I always found it funny that there were a lot of people that loved Akane as like this like badass girl boss warrior character because of her being a fighter, but like she never wins a single fight in the entire game. She just gets fucking dusted by Nekomaru over and over again, dusted by Monokuma. Like, Sakura in DR1 was able to fight Monokuma, and it, I guess, just came to a stalemate. Like, Monokuma just couldn't kill her. Akane just lost and almost died, and in general, Akane is punished in the narrative for only relying on those strengths in this killing game. So I never considered her to be like this cool action hero character. But anyways, yeah, she's very unsentimental but she becomes sentimental over Nekomaru, who she bonds with in the story, in ways that she doesn't really understand, since she's very emotionally unintelligent as well, and she doesn't get her own sense of attachment to him, or anyone else for that matter. She's also an angry character. She gets mad at, like, the weirdest shit at the drop of a hat, but she's also kind of unable to control her urges and almost kills Kamaida in Chapter 5 because of her anger fits. And she also has a gut instinct, which is like basically the most important part of her entire character as a person and as a meta commentary. But yeah, she has athletic instincts, and she talks about her gut all the time in trials as such, and in investigations. She has many animalistic qualities, like, say, a heightened sense of smell and such, and she's really, 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 really fucking stupid. As for the parts of her character that people tend to gloss over or miss entirely, Akane clearly goes through some sort of focused arc in Chapter 4, though to many people it's unclear how she changed or what she learned, and then there are her FTEs, which some people don't do. In Akane's FTEs, we learn that she grew up poor. This is also another point that's all over the main game. You know, like, we know that she's hedonistic, and she seems to only pursue straightforward pleasures like food and fighting as such, but she also strangely doesn't seem to mind eating garbage food, and she literally, like, she just enjoys eating anything. In Chapter 4, she chooses to have a crummy room when she could have just taken a nice room, because she says it's all good to her, you know, it's better than where she grew up anyways. She's hedonistic, but she doesn't seem to seek greater and greater pleasures. She just takes whatever she can get, and is, like, happy with that. So then, we learn that Akane has a bunch of, like, foster and step-parents and a bunch of siblings from different parents and families that she's been in. None of her parental figures have ever seemed to do much to take care of them, and Akane got good at gymnastics by doing parkour as a child, by running from law enforcement, because she was working while underage to earn money for herself and her siblings and such. So, she talks about how it's, like, common to find dead bodies where she lived, and she generally just expects the people she talks to die sooner or later. You know, starvation was a constant worry for her, and by the end, we learn that she hates the idea of relying on other people, and she considers, like, that emotional vulnerability and connections with people to be a weakness, which is akin to, like, death, as she knows it, and where she's grown up, that she can't show weakness, I guess. She doesn't elaborate on that, but that's pretty much what she says. From this, we can better understand Akane in Chapter 4, for example, on how Gundam relates to her beliefs. Akane is reckless. She gets everyone in trouble and ignores their warnings and tries to fight Monokuma, literally just for fun. Like, and gets Nekomaru hurt, partially because she didn't understand and anticipate why someone else would sacrifice their own safety for her, and partly because she doesn't really think about the consequences of her actions. Akane is used to everyone around her dying constantly, so she's very, very unsentimental. That's the best way to generally describe Akane. She's unsentimental. Akane has no respect for life itself. Even in Chapter 4, like, when she learns that there is no food in the funhouse, she says, there's a line where she says, "I don't mind starving as long as I can eat." You know, this is played as a joke, obviously, but it also does perfectly capture her warped sort of worldview. Akane pursues hedonistic pleasures to a fault. You know, to her, like, the pleasure of eating food is, like, the important thing to her. Whether she lives or dies isn't really as big of a deal in comparison. You know, she still clearly doesn't understand her own concerns over the safety of Nekomaru, you know, like, based on her cringe-ass conversation with Fuyuhiko in the funhouse, where he tries to give her advice and expresses his own feelings about Peko to her, and she ends up thinking that he was trying to flirt with him in that conversation because, like, God made Akane so that the human race could devolve. But when Akane was turned into when Nekomaru was turned into Mekamaru, Akane felt bad for him specifically because she thought it must suck ass to have a mechanical body like that. You know, like, from his perspective, not only is it being a sick-ass robot, like, dope as fuck, it also would have solved the problem of his fatal heart condition that we learn about in his FTEs, so of course he'd love being a robot bro. However, Akane could only see being a robot as a negative because his robot body, you know, like, in very I have no mouth and I must scream kind of logic, it wouldn't allow him to experience hedonistic pleasures anymore. He wouldn't feel a satisfying shit, or eating tasty food, or just, like, feeling his muscles in his body as he moves and exerts himself and does things. All things Akane thinks make life fun. You know, those are what Akane values. In Chapter 6, Akane is the one who pushes the hardest against the idea that they're in a simulation, and she expresses that she's very attached to the idea that she's like a flesh and blood human in her own real body. That's something that's very important to her. Now, there's something that I glossed over, and it's the fact that Akane worked to support not only herself, but also her siblings. This presents an ambiguous dynamic to this characterization that I've talked about. Did Akane actually have a close and caring relationship with her siblings? I mean, she doesn't know how many siblings she even has, and she lives with them all now, I believe she says, even though she's expressed that most of the time she's alone in her daily life. It seems contradictory to her personality for her to go out of her way to do something to, like, take care of other people, since she doesn't even grasp the concept of self-sacrifice or sentimentality. She actively resists caring about other people and connecting with people. So were her siblings an exception to that? Were they like an obligation to her? Or were they part of like a contradiction in her own mentality? All of these are possible, although I lean towards it being a contradiction. Not that it's like a writing mistake, but like it's very common for people to have views that contradict their other views, especially stupid people, you know? There's dialogue in her FTEs where she says like, oh, you shouldn't ever run a red light, that's bad, even though she herself has broken the law many times and she's just generally a reckless asshole, you know? She probably thinks both of these things make perfect sense, and she never stops to question whether or not her views even match up with each other, because she's just a dumbass, and she just has a bunch of isolated ideas and thoughts that she's just blindly accepted in her head, like, she's like blindly accepted, oh, you can't run red lights, or oh, school swimsuits are embarrassing to wear, apparently. You know, as she says. In any case, she does a lot for her siblings and wants to keep them safe, and her thoughts and reasoning on the subject aren't the most vital to know, since they wouldn't necessarily contradict what we already know about her personality. Anyways, all this is to say that Akane's main realization that happens in Chapter 4 is the value of life itself, which both Mechamaru and Gundam express to her. Not just the value of being alive, but the value of, you know, carrying with you the people who are gone. So, that's a pretty good groundwork on the character. Now, let's make some interpretive inferences about Akane's past by examining some other characters. Let's talk about Komaeda, since we always have to talk about Komaeda. We can pretty easily surmise, assuming that most of the things that he said were at least partially true, that Komaeda's luck, talent, had a very huge impact on his life. Komaeda is insane because his talent gives him good and bad luck in equal measures, seemingly according to his own values. Like, he has a brain disease and other shit from the bad luck that he's experienced and a lot of childhood trauma. And the fact that with everything good, a bad thing was quick to follow and vice versa, this taught him through his life that hope and despair are just two sides of the same coin. This informs his belief that causing despair will generate hope, because to his life, because of his talent, everything is give and take to him. Everything stems from his talent. He was born with this talent, and it shaped his entire being as the person he is now. There are plenty of other characters who can be seen this way. Their talents are a reflection of the tropes that they're meant to embody, and we can see that in many other cases where DR2's character talent is described in a way that makes it more of like a shackle than a gift. Like Fat Tagami, Mr. Imposter, his talent was described this way too. That his talent was to not be his own person, to always be an imposter, so he could never be his own person, etc. DR2 has a lot of criticisms of the established and simplistic worldview of the original. You know, like, hope is shown to be something very toxic in this game, in a very similar way to how hope is like the enemy of V3, because people commit murder and go through all these atrocities in the name of hope. Komaeda embodies that belief in DR2. He proves that hope is toxic because it requires tragedy and conflict for it to exist in the first place. He makes people suffer in the name of creating this ambiguous thing called hope. There's a line from Hajime, I think in the first murder investigation in DR2, where he thinks to himself, oh, one of our classmates is dead, and we have to find the killer from our friends and execute them. That's our only hope. And then he thinks to himself, wait, this is hope? You know, or something along those lines. In the same sense, Komaeda, and for that matter, Hope's Peak Academy in this story, believe that talent is the only thing that matters. Only talented people are worthy. Only they can create hope and be hope. But we see many times that people's talents are often negative influences in their lives. This is an aspect of DR2 that I really love. There are at least 4 different ways of looking at every single character, I guess except for Chiaki. We can look at them as what we're shown, like the normal way, how they are in the plot. We can look at them as a meta-commentary about the tropes that they engage with. We can look at them in terms of how their talent has affected their life and their own toxic hope. And we can look at them knowing that they were all remnants of despair at some point, and knowing that they must be the sort of person who could be influenced to become despairs. Now, the DR3, the anime, kind of retcons this a lot, but in the original DR2, it seems very likely that the DR2 cast were not, brainwashed into becoming despairs. They were probably just manipulated, and their worst traits were exploited. We only see the despair versions of Mikan and Hajime. We only see despair Mikan and Izuru, and both of them seem like they became despairs of their own will, not because they were mind-controlled into becoming evil. Izuru would have obvious reasons to become a despair, because he's no longer Hajime, he's like his own weird, evil talent person. And Mikan had many, many, many exploitable emotional traits to lead to her becoming a despair, with her silent animosity towards those who've abused her in her past, her attention-seeking nature, and her desire for, acceptance and affection and so on. We can see how Junko got Mikan to latch onto her as a romantic figure and accept all of her flaws without, the looks of judgment or discomfort that Mikan is used to seeing from others around her, As we can see in her FTEs, where even Hajime, someone who has no ill will against her, who doesn't want to bully her or anything like that, Hajime is still very uncomfortable around Mikan and unsure of how to act around her. And Mikan is smart. Mikan can tell that he's uncomfortable, and she accurately explains it. Even Hajime comments in her FTEs that Mikan's way too smart for him to lie to her and say, "Oh no, I'm fine, I'm totally comfortable, I'm not being weird at all," because she's much more observant and intelligent than most give her credit for, She knows that people that find her unpleasant to be around because of her extreme personality. So we can look to characters like Akane and see how she behaves in the game and imagine the strategies that Junko could have employed and the traits that she could have exploited to make Akane into a despair. For Akane, it's not that hard to see. Before entering Hope's Peak, Akane was totally emotionally detached from other people. She had no respect for human life. She's prone to possibly killing people in fits of anger, as seen in Chapter 5. She's very stupid, and she wants to seek, greater and greater opponents to fight, and so on. So that part's easy. It's easy to see how she could have become a despair. But what about her talent? How has her talent shaped Akane's life, like Komaida's did? Well, this is one of the more interesting aspects of Akane. How has her talent shaped her life, and is it for better or for worse? Obviously, everyone in this class has become a remnant of despair for the fact that they attended Hope's Peak Academy, so there is that, overarching huge negative hanging over their heads. They're here because they're talented, and it was a huge negative for all of them. The lust that the world has for separating the talented from the normal people is a huge detriment in and of itself. However, Akane was living in very poor conditions as a child, and probably would have gone through worse, or maybe not survived at all, if she wasn't a gifted person. Akane is the ultimate gymnast, so she's very fast, flexible, she's pretty strong, although she's not as strong as Nekomaru or Sakura or any of those other characters, and she has great coordination and balance. She has a flawless, attractive body, and most of all, she has great instincts. This is stated about 1,000,000 fucking times. Akane has natural instincts. Nekomaru, when they're training, says that her instincts are second to none, but she needs to remember the basics and train, or she'll always be second-rate if she just relies on instinct. This is interesting to me because we can observe a lot about Akane's instincts. I would go so far as to say that Akane is not the ultimate gymnast, but instead her ultimate talent is her flawless instincts, her gut. Akane's gut is literally supernatural. In fact, it is extremely similar to Komaida's luck. Akane has gut reactions that just tell her objective truths all the time. She knows the correct answer in the trials at multiple occasions just from her gut instincts. She knows a lot of completely non-existent information through her gut that there's no way for her to factually know, and it's basically just an omnipotent force in the story. You can also go really broad with it. Like, you know how you can say that maybe Makoto in DR1 is an ultimate lucky student, and his luck is what keeps him alive and makes him win the killing game and defeat Junko? Which seems possible given that Kirigiri dies in Chapter 5 in the bad ending of DR1 and other factors, but Makoto doesn't. But what's to say that Akane didn't survive because her natural instincts guided her to survival at every point? How powerful are Akane's gut reactions? And to what end do they support her? We can see that Kamaida's luck is a power that will support his own biased and personal worldview of hope and luck. You know, when he gets lucky, it's not necessarily something that will even be, like, better or healthier for him as a person, or make him have, like, a happier life. It will just get him what he thinks that he wants, you know? Do Akane's instincts work in a similar way? Do they just work to keep her alive, since they mostly seem to kick in only during, like, investigations and trials a lot of the times where it's necessary for her to notice things and stay alive? We know that she became a remnant of despair. So, are these things, like, good for her as an individual? Do they make her a happier person? In any case, what we can say for certain is that Akane's gut knows factual information, such as which clues are important, like what the murder weapon is, like a lot of the time, you know, it chooses the correct answer for her even when she is too stupid. She has no idea why they're important. Knowing this, we can probably make a few inferences about her life up till now. If we take the Komaida angle and say that he's had these powers since he was born, and that she's had these powers since she was born, that her survival instincts would have kept her alive in a lot of her impoverished situations, right? It would have also helped her reach any academic decisions, like and helped her make logical choices, right? Quite frankly, her gut can do literally most of Akane's thinking for her, as we see in the trials. Whenever she has something valuable to offer, it's because she had a gut reaction that just told her the right answer. If we think of it like that, like let Jesus take the wheel and all, you know, since her instincts, her magical, like, talent of instincts will keep her safe, it might explain why she's so reckless, even when she grew up struggling to survive. Why she's so stupid, you know, since she never had to use her brain to make choices. And of course, she probably never went to school or anything either, but, like, it's very possible that her own talent has informed many of her life experiences and why she has the personality she currently does. You know, perhaps she never felt like she might die trying to fight Monokuma because her instincts have always led her to choices where she'd end up safe. You know? She's led a dangerous and, like, starvation-filled, like, struggling life, but, like, how can she be so reckless? You would think that she would be a cautious individual and be very careful and conservative at that point, but she's not. So her gut instinct knew that Nekomaru, like, she would be fine, and that, you know, if she was in any danger, Nekomaru would take the hit for her. Is that a stretch? I think not. It explains a lot about her character. There's no way she grew up as underprivileged and starving as she did and made such reckless choices, unless she had this veil of protection, right? That's why she is so stupid. She literally has never had to think for herself because her gut knows things and makes the right choices for her most of the time. Now, getting back to my original question, is this a good thing or a bad thing? Well, it's complicated. It's actually a very ambiguous display in this story. It really does explore both sides of this concept very well. Akane's stupidity and recklessness is a large focus of the game, and it makes positive and negative arguments for these traits. On one hand, Akane's stupidity is what causes Nekomaru to be hurt by the bazooka, which arguably influences the course of Chapter 3 as well, since, like, Nekomaru wasn't around for most of Chapter 3. Akane almost kills Komaeda in Chapter 5, although Chiaki stops her and slaps the fucking shit out of her. Akane is just generally, like, too stupid to live, and there are many things that she fails to understand basically all the time. She can't understand social cues, she has difficulty connecting with people since she can't understand them, she has awful communication and interpretation skills, and so on. However, there are very clear positives put forth about her personality, even these traits. Akane is an outwardly happy person most of the time, and part of this is clearly due to her not having a perception of what she's been through. Akane talks about situations where she was, like, sexually exploited or abused many times, and she doesn't even seem to grasp why these things are bad in the first place, and so she simply doesn't interpret them as anything to worry about. The only trauma in her life that she seems to carry with her in a serious way is, like, the reality of death. That people will die around her, and that, like, she has a sense of shame over showing what she considers to be weakness. Now, in her FTEs, she doesn't say that she wants to show weakness because weakness leads to death. You know, Akane says that she feels weak when she connects with other people, that she feels weak when she's around Hajime at the end of her FTEs, whatever. She feels stronger when she's alone. Now, obviously, she hasn't processed this out entirely, but it means that, at least in her eyes, she's pursuing the feeling of being strong. In any case, in any sense of the word that she feels it, and this also feeds into the tropes that Akane embodies. So, like, in that sort of, like, Forrest Gump kind of way, Akane is happy and carefree and lives her simple, dumb life because she's so stupid. She is too stupid to worry about things that don't really matter. So, she enjoys simple pleasures, and she's satisfied by them. Neither of these things are incorrect. There is truth to, like, the happiness that she gets from her stupid, simple view of life. And there is truth to the negatives and downsides that her stupidity can bring to others and herself. It's a nuanced discussion on the topic, which makes it a nuanced discussion on her talent itself. Was her talent good for her and her upbringing? Did she rely so much on her talent that she didn't develop in other ways that are important for living a healthy and satisfying life? This is an extreme and supernatural example, but this does reflect real life. Gifted children often fail to develop certain skills because of how much their talent carries them through the obstacles set in place for children. Like the phenomenon where a child genius is the top of their class all through, like, high school or so, and then at whatever point they reach the people that are actually on par with their talents or intelligence, they feel as though they hit a wall and they aren't gifted anymore. And they start to fail since they've never faced this true competition or adversity before. In Akane's case, this is a very complex question. It asks us about what people should truly be pursuing. Is Akane happy being alone and hedonistic? If she believes that she's happy, is that good enough? Should she be seeking out personal connections and relationships to develop with other people and find people who can make up for her shortcomings? Will she be okay on her own, or will she eventually hit a wall that she can't overcome, as Nekomaru seems to be suggesting will happen if she just relies on her natural talents? There are a lot of parts in the game where this is focused on in some way with Akane. Akane is a representation of someone who is naturally gifted to the point where they've never had to work to maintain their talents. She's never learned to work hard because she's just gifted, and we see this all over her various gifts that she has. Like Mahiru comments during the party in Chapter 1 that if she eats too much, she'll ruin her perfect figure, you know? And we know that Akane has this perfect figure, and yet, like, her design is this perfect balance to show off this characterization. Since she has unkempt hair in this slapped-together outfit, we can see the contrast that she is naturally gifted with this appearance, even though she puts no effort into it at all. No effort to maintaining or improving it in any way. Would she actually ruin her figure if she eats too much, or does her ultimate level talent override anything that she could do to sabotage her natural gifts? Once she reaches a high enough level of competition, will she experience that kind of genius burnout? Where they can't cope and they don't know how to improve their talent to rise to a challenge. Akane's only challenge that she seems to meet in this game is trying to beat Nekomaru, and Nekomaru, and others, they say that Akane is someone who can only learn through actions rather than words. So maybe losing to Nekomaru over and over is healthy for her? Has she never lost to anyone before this? Perhaps not. But even so, does she really need to become stronger and hone her natural gifts? Should she seek out strength, and what form of strength should it be? Like the strength to come out on top in competitions and have no weaknesses? The strength to recognize and overcome her weaknesses? Would all these things matter if someone's already satisfied in the life that they have and they've already achieved success? Akane makes plenty of money now and has already gotten her siblings to live in their own place. Does she really need to achieve more to live a happy life? Does she need to become the best athlete she could possibly be? Does she need to put effort to maintain her figure and work to enhance her natural beauty? What is the goal? Is it a matter of personal responsibility to others? Her stupidity ends up harming others in the killing game, so should she become a stronger and healthier person in order to avoid her weaknesses and shortcomings from hurting those around her? Like innocent bystanders, or maybe even her siblings? She thinks that she doesn't care about anyone, but she does feel inexplicably sad when Nekomaru is hurt. Akane generally has the attitude of like, oh, what's the point, throughout most of the game. When Nekomaru tries to give her advice, she doesn't care, over and over. She says that she doesn't care, Nekomaru says, oh, she just ignored me, probably because of this very dilemma. Like she, like I am right now, is wondering, well, what is the big deal? What is so important that it should force her to change in some way, change her ways, when she already believes herself to be sated? It's an interesting situation all around. If you think about it, upon becoming a Despair, Akane probably has killed her siblings. We're told multiple times that the Despair did that sort of thing to their families, so her siblings are most likely dead already. Knowing how she interacts with Nekomaru, she probably didn't think that she'd care that much and thus be that sad upon, her siblings' deaths, maybe, or perhaps she was already too much of a Despair by then to care when she killed them. It seems as though Akane tries to live purely through hedonism, but it's not enough for her. She feels conflicted and needs more, as evidenced by her FTEs, where she's trying to convince herself all she needs is hedonism. It seems like living this casual lifestyle isn't as simple as she hopes it would be, and perhaps she does need to grow and change in order to become satisfied as her life goes on. There is also a detail where if you hang out with Akane in Chapter 5, she is actually training and invites Hajime to train with her, which means that she is, at that point, finally putting effort into bettering herself and honing her natural talents near the end of the game. And, there is a point to make of, pursuing the best version of oneself, self-respect, and honing one's talents, for instance, because, if Akane truly committed herself, in any of the ways that she's gifted and talented, she could become, there's so much that she could accomplish and, shine, I guess, within her community, within the competitive environment. Unclear if she even cares about any of these things, but she could go down in history as one of the greatest athletes ever if she applied herself to actually honing any of these talents, and there probably is value in that, since she is so gifted and because she was imbued, I guess, just like everyone else at birth, with so much talent, that is it right to squander it? And, perhaps in a Kamaida way of thinking, what would the greatest version of Akane actually look like? It's probably something pretty incredible. It seems like Akane needs to hold a higher standard for herself, both in terms of how she acts and what she gets out of it. Hajime scolds her for letting people sexually abuse and harass her without complaint. He insists that she should have more self-respect and want better quality for herself. And is this true? She doesn't understand the bad things she went through, so she doesn't think of it as in a negative way, but it's true that it's still bad that she was abused and taken advantage of, right? She lets herself get a crummy room in Chapter 4, she eats a living frog from Monokuma's curry, she just has no standards for herself. Is this because she likes and enjoys everything? Or should she want more for herself? It seems like the only people that ever scolded Akane in her life and told her to take care of herself more were the old man who got her into gymnastics, Hajime and the FTEs, and Nekomaru. The old man is weird, since it's unclear if he is still in Akane's life or not, but he's the only parental figure she's ever had to rely on. But it doesn't seem like they've interacted that much, he helped her get into gymnastics and scolded her to take better care of herself. People tend to misunderstand and think that this old man was also sexually harassing her, but he wasn't, most likely. Akane thinks that he was because she's an idiot. Why should we trust Akane on who or is not perverted? She thinks Fuyuhiko was hitting on her in the funhouse, and she thinks her stepmom's boyfriends were just giving her massages. The old man just valued her as an athlete, just like Nekomaru respects her as an athlete and doesn't view her sexually. This personality trait of Akane's is also largely informed by the fact that Akane has never had any strong parental figures. She shifts parents around constantly, and they all suck. They don't support their kids, they just leave everything to Akane, and if they don't even directly abuse her, Akane has never had anyone to scold her before. No one's corrected her behavior or taught her self-respect or guided her in any way. In any event, Akane really becomes as the game goes on, she becomes part of the group dynamic near the end of the game. She allows herself to have her flaws and her weak points covered for by the rest of the survivors. In Chapter 4, she, learns this thing from Gundam and Nekomaru about, respecting life and actually trying to preserve it and caring about the people who have already passed on, like carrying that with her. So she's not some Mary Sue that becomes like a perfect version of herself by the end. She's just like a bit better and a bit healthier than before. She lets Chiaki rein her in when she becomes too unstable, and she listens to her. This is of course true for most of the survivors. They're all people who do become better people in the group dynamic as opposed to like being by themselves. They all become better for it by the end. Sonya is helped from having peers that are her equals rather than being the highest figure in her society as she's known all her life. Hajime has these people around him who actually respect him for who he is and don't ask him to have like these meaningless talents that he doesn't already have, etc. So, all that being said, now, on to the next little section, the tropes. I will admit, I am not as much of an expert on Japanese media tropes as I would like to be, so there are many nuances to the reconstructions of all of these games that will completely fly over my head all the time. But with Akane, I can at least point out some things that are pretty clear. Akane is a parody of a shonen battle protagonist. Not only does Akane have many tropish traits in common with shonen heroes, such as her stupidity, her massive appetite, her totally unexplained desire to fight strong opponents, whatever that means, and the way that she's portrayed in action, like most clearly how other characters talk about her. Like when they're training on the beach in Chapter 2, they describe the fight using a lot of like tropish phrasing in terms like, oh, she's probably gonna get even stronger. They describe the situation like it's right out of a shonen battle series where the hero has to like level up to fight the next big bad, and Akane must evolve to face this challenge. Not only that, but Akane also has many direct references to certain shonen protagonists, most frequently Gon from Hunter x Hunter. In the anime, they're very obvious. There's a very clear visual reference to adult Gon, and Akane has pretty much the same traits as Gon. She's dumb, she's animalistic, she has many animal-like traits, which hails back to Gon in Hunter x Hunter, because Gon grew up in nature. His personality was shaped by the wilderness and how animals treat each other. Akane has like a great sense of smell, as does Gon, and they're both shonen protagonists with a lot of like potential and great instincts, but they aren't like necessarily the strongest people around in their respective stories. Furthermore, both of their motivations are somewhat shallow. Gon is purely driven by curiosity. He wants to become a hunter because he's innately curious and he wants to explore anything and everything in life, which comes across in his personality many times as he shows interest in all sorts of different things that aren't like battle related. However, Akane as a shonen hero is like a more realistic portrayal of that, is only interested in things that she already thinks she's interested in and is bored by basically everything else. And she expresses some interesting diversions from the typical expectations, like most prominently, her work ethic compared to most shonen protagonists. I hesitate to use the term lazy, but Akane does not want to train. She does not want to work hard or to grow or anything, and she doesn't want to practice her basics. She wants the shonen hero moment where, someone suddenly becomes stronger without putting in real work. She doesn't refine her talent, she squanders it. This is the irony of shonen storytelling. The appeal of shonen battle stories to many people is that the hero gets stronger and beats the powerful villain, and it's satisfying. Even if the said character, even if it's said that a character trains, it's usually done in a time lapse, off screen in some way. It's cheating. The people who read these shonen stories probably aren't going to be motivated to put in a ton of work to improve themselves. They'll probably just see these quick, flashy, back-to-back parts where the hero evolves and beats the villain, and they'll feel good about themselves for it. This is exactly what Mob Psycho 100 criticizes as well in shonen storytelling, where all the villains in Mob Psycho 100 feel entitled to evolution and greatness because they have some innate talent or something that makes them special, that makes them the protagonist. And they feel as though they're just destined to be that anime hero. Whereas Mob slowly puts in the effort and makes meaningful changes to himself and not focusing so much on his unique special talent. Akane never accomplishes anything through her shonen delusions. She isn't a shonen hero who will accomplish a great feat or save the world or anything. Her fighting never leads to anything being solved. She can't beat Monokuma and win and leave. Her mindset is totally fueled by shonen battle expectations. Again, this is a common trait for Danganronpa characters. Danganronpa is a commentary on media tropes. So the characters are often aware of tropes and base their worldview off of those tropes, and the stories are often criticisms of, like, looking at reality as it would be portrayed through tropes. Akane believes in shonen battle messages. Like, her character is built off the ground of what if someone actually believed in these messages, you know? She says similar things, like, and that her desire to win will just make her succeed, that she'll just get stronger and win, all I gotta do is win, etc. It's showing how those media tropes are flawed, how they will lead to inaccurate assumptions and they don't reflect a healthy mindset for reality. This also reflects one of the staples of Danganronpa, making fun of extreme anime tropes by taking characters with unrealistic godlike talents, but then placing them in a situation where their godlike talents are pretty much useless, and, like, basic common sense is the most important factor. It parodies the mythos of extreme anime characters with extreme powers, and just puts them in a situation that normalizes everyone, breaking down that mythos. We have other tropes too, even simple ones, like, say, how Akane is clearly meant to embody the shameless girl trope with the way that she acts and dresses, but shame is actually one of Akane's most prominent motivations, as she says in her FTEs, you know. Akane shows that she's scared of ghosts in her FTEs, and she's embarrassed about this because she thinks it makes her seem weak to Hajime and others. Seeming weak and being ashamed of that is what drives a lot of her choices, including her emotional isolation. Her perception of what is or is not shameful is just, like, very different from everyone else. Like, we can see when Hajime thinks the exact same thing upon her bizarre comment over school swimsuits in Chapter 1. Or maybe it was a prologue. I think it was a prologue. Now, like many people know, Akane was originally intended to serve a different role in this game, and some of her archetypes and some of her tropes may have been more based off of her role as the mastermind rather than what she ended up being in the actual game release. Either, like, her traits and tropes were adapted into this other character, or there's, like, some leftover tropes for when she used to serve that different role in the story. I don't really care. I'm only going to concern myself with the character that we got, not whatever else was ever planned for her character. So that's most of everything I wanted to talk about. There's a few other things that I just personally love about Akane that just popped into my head at one point or another. They don't really feed into, like, my core arguments I've mostly wrapped up, so I'll just, like, lightning round here them at the end. I fucking love that in her FTEs, Akane says that she got good at running and jumping and shit by doing parkour to run away from the cops, or whatever, as they chased her for working underage at various places. Like most people, I read this the first time and many other times and thought nothing of it at first. I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense, you know, that's fitting. But if you stop and think about it, this is weird and, like, goofy and charming. So, think about it. Akane was extremely poor. She has siblings to take care of, and she was starving all the time. And she has godlike talents at a young age. And yet she didn't, like, steal things. Like, she broke the law and had cops on her tail, but she wasn't, like, robbing people or anything. She just worked? She just worked while underage. Akane, the girl who hates hard work, who hates training and boring shit, and hates listening to people that she's not interested in. She just wants to, like, eat and fight strong people and stuff all the time. That Akane worked like a 9-to-5, like she was a waiter. Like, she brought food to people. She would, like, drag out bags of trash to the dumpster at the end of her shift. Like, she did this kind of shit. There was a moment where I was, like, working at one of my jobs doing some mundane menial task, and I just randomly thought to myself, wait, Akane did this? It was one of the weirdest thoughts that's ever entered my skull. The mental image of Akane, like, slowly cleaning dishes in the back of a kitchen was just, like, so bizarre to me, but it endeared me to the character way more. This suggests that Akane either she has, like, a moral foundation for why she didn't want to steal things, which seems like it would have been easier for her to do. Or maybe a sense of pride about not stealing things, or maybe she's just so dumb that she didn't think to steal of things. She was like, oh, I work and I get money. All of these things seem equally possible. It's also interesting to think why she would do this, and what it says about her values. Akane hates working hard and doing anything that bores her, so does this mean that she actually enjoyed working? I ask because she seems to recount these stories to Hajime with like a big smile on her face a lot of the time, so it's possible that she found a way to enjoy her work and not sweat the details too much. She probably had a lot of jobs all over the place, so she likely still did whatever she wanted in the moment. She probably got fired a couple of times, but she wouldn't sweat it. She'd just go and find another job. But then I think back to some of her comments about like not running red lights, and it's also very possible that she just blindly accepts that work is necessary and she just does it, even if she doesn't enjoy it, which to me is much more endearing as an interpretation of her character. Like the idea that she has like the personal respect and like fundamental responsibility to take care of herself financially, even when she's such a free spirit who hates boredom. It says a lot about her fundamental work ethic and like worldview. I mean, like, she never questions anything else about her life. Akane and Mikan are very similar characters. They were both abused in many ways, they lived tragic lives, but Mikan is very smart, and Akane is very stupid. Akane never once thought, oh, why is this happening to me? She just doesn't think to question things. She just takes life as it is and does what needs to be done and enjoys herself where she can. So yeah, Akane is pretty cool. She presents many nuanced points of conflict in the story. I will admit, even upon replaying DR2 many times, I don't think Akane is the most likable character moment to moment, I don't find most of her jokes very funny. I don't think she's that entertaining to watch. Her words are very rarely like that interesting to ponder, and she's not the most like dramatically resonant character either. I'm never emotionally attached to her connection to Nekomaru, and she feels like a background element in chapter 4, honestly. It's only from a bird's eye view that I really think Akane works as a compelling character. But regardless, I think Akane is a compelling character, and I hope you found something interesting to think about in my cool-ass little video thingy I've made here. I'll probably make more of these, so subscribe and stick around, or like something. Fucking dear God, I'm begging you, I never get any subscribers. I started my channel with like fighting game content, and now that I'm branching out, the YouTube algorithms are smiting me for doing anything that isn't Street Fighter. Please, God, help me. Alright, thanks. See you later.